It's so nice to see you all here. I know this is a big week for being elsewhere. I'm so grateful for the time that we have together in this really important week to talk about food and food systems, actually. So I'll get started. I'll start by saying also that I missed you last week, so extra special thanks to Mara for carrying the seminar. And I heard you all had a great discussion with Cheryl Weiser from Eat Local First. So thank you for your thoughtful reflections on those and for your engagement in seminar. We are, of course, in week 8. The quarter is flying by. And that means you have 2 more opportunities to submit weekly reflections if you're in Nutrition 400. So just one more reminder that you only need to submit 5 of the 8 opportunities. And it's probably a good time in the quarter just to double check in your grade book how many you've submitted, where you're at, and you can make a decision about whether you need to hand in this and next week's or whether you can give yourself a pass on that. I also just wanted to draw your attention to the final assignments module that's up on Canvas. It's been up there and open for a while now, but if you haven't had a chance to check that out, please do. The final assignments are due the Monday of exam week, and there are final assignments for both Nutrition 400 and 500 students. And so there are different assignments, so please just go and open up the module that's specific to your class. And if you have any questions, of course, you can reach out to Mara and I over Canvas. But we look forward to both your weekly reflections, your summative reflection, and then also really your final reflections about how these topics that we've been covering all quarter relate to your areas of study, your future career goals, and how you're going to carry forward some of this learning. So this is a very important week for a First Peoples Acknowledgement. As you remember from the beginning of this month, this is Native American Heritage Month. We're still in the month of November. But this Friday will actually also be Native American Heritage Day, and that's something that is more of a state-by-state basis, but Washington State has declared it to be a statewide day of acknowledgement and appreciation. You've seen this slide before. You know, I started the seminar with this, and we often come back to this as a point of pause, a point of reflection, a point of appreciation, and also a point where we might do some of our own kind of grappling, right? Where are we from? Where are we now? Where are our families from? Whose lands are we on? Whether they're our own family's lands, whether we're invited or uninvited settlers on lands. This is a really important activity that can be done all over the world. And I shared this resource with you on the first day, native-land.ca, and that's a really great resource because you can look up where you are anywhere in the world and see whose native traditional territories you're on. So of course, here at the University of Washington, we are on traditional, ancestral, and often unceded Coast Salish territory. And so that includes the tribes and bands within the Puyallup, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations, and also the Duwamish tribe. And they're noted down here as well. And the Duwamish tribe is noted separately because they actually don't have federal recognition. And so that is an ongoing kind of battle for the Duwamish tribe and for their neighbors as well. I'm just going to skip to this. This is a quote that I wanted to share with you about what can happen after you make a land acknowledgement. So Valerie Segrest is a Muckleshoot Native Foods educator, and she has actually spoken in this seminar before. She was a student at UW a while back, and she has a great article in the Seattle Times just last week, I think, where she talked about, you know, the kind of opportunity that Thanksgiving affords to us, right? Thanksgiving is a complicated history, a complicated time where there's a lot of desire to celebrate and to be together and to enjoy foods with our family and our friends. But it's also a point of trauma for a lot of Native communities because the story of Thanksgiving that many of us are familiar with does not reflect all histories. And that kind of classic Thanksgiving dinner that is often referred to is one that is a story that can be told from many perspectives. And the main American narrative of it being a coming together is not one that's embraced by all communities, especially by all Native communities who have said, actually, that's where a lot of the genocide started to occur. So I really appreciate Valerie Segrest's perspective on Thanksgiving, because she says, let's not take away Thanksgiving, but let's think about what Thanksgiving can afford to us. In addition to being this important time of coming together to appreciate good food with friends and family, it's also an opportunity to teach the true history and culture of Native people. So it doesn't mean don't celebrate Thanksgiving, don't have you don't need to have, I'm not encouraging you to kind of, stop traditions at all. I'm not encouraging that at all, but I am bringing forward this perspective that's in the Seattle Times by Valerie Segrest to say, as you do that, perhaps there are ways to think about how we bring forward these different perspectives on history and the real historical native narrative of what has happened on these lands and to the peoples of these lands, and to use Thanksgiving as part of an actual telling of history in a way that promotes visibility and tells the real story about people in this country who were colonized, who have been colonized, but who also had this extremely rich history pre-contact that persists today. And so some strategies we can use is even trying to bring in one local food, right? One native plant, one native food into our Thanksgiving meals, for example. So cranberry is a classic Thanksgiving food, of course. It also is a native plant to here, right? So you can actually go into forests around here and find cranberry bogs. So something to think about is, where did those traditional foods come from? What can we still access today? And how do we bring those stories forward and really to the front of how we celebrate and how we honor and how we build community across communities as we go forward? So in addition to Native American Heritage Month, which has been declared as a national acknowledgement, the state of Washington and our Governor Jay Inslee has also declared Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, as Native American Heritage Day. And so after you've had the opportunity to celebrate Thanksgiving, I want to encourage you to also have the opportunity, sorry, my slides are a bit all over the place today. After you've had the opportunity to celebrate Thanksgiving, then hopefully you'll have the opportunity to continue that reflection through Native American Heritage Day. I also wanted to spend a moment here acknowledging that Thanksgiving is not an easy time this year. It's especially difficult because of rising food costs, and that is a real struggle that many of our students here on campus and many people in Seattle and across the nation are in deep struggle with. So there are some pretty alarming numbers out there about the cost of Thanksgiving, cost of Thanksgiving meal going up by 20%, really significant amounts. There are also discounts if you get your turkey late, so do look for sales. So that is, it's kind of a little bit balanced out depending on when those numbers were assessed. But I wanted to draw your attention to a recent NPR article that talks about substitutions giving, inflation-friendly substitutes for Thanksgiving dinner. It's a pretty useful and also, a bit fun adventure into how we can still celebrate, but do it in a budget-friendly way. And I also wanted to remind all of you that everybody is welcome at UW Food Pantry, and I believe they have hours that are open this week, although actually I meant to check that before class, so I'm not sure. But thank you so much to those of you who have managed to bring in some food for the pantry. We'll be passing that on, and we'll continue our collection for the food drive through next week as well. So if you haven't had a chance and you have capacity to do so, please do feel free to bring in some non-perishable foods for next week as well, and then we'll wrap up the class food drive. All right, so that was my kind of overview of this is a big, important, and complicated week to talk about food systems. And at the crux of it is really about this appreciation, this acknowledgement, and this deep respect for communities and for the need for equity within communities. And so it is my great, great pleasure, that was my segue, Lorna, my great, great pleasure to have the opportunity to bring before you one of the project managers of a new initiative for the City of Seattle, and it is called the Food Equity Fund. This is hot off the presses. So it's a really new and still emerging program. And we have with us one of, maybe there's, well, you'll tell us, Lorna, how many project managers, how many people are working on this, but we have one of the project managers, Lorna Velasco, who will come up in just a moment. And she's helping to manage and to ultimately administer this fund. But I also wanted to acknowledge that Lorna was in this seminar series several years ago, before the pandemic. I think it was 2019 when we had a food justice theme. Lorna's also a farmer, a local farmer, and so she has her own personal, beautiful narrative of how she has been so deeply involved in food systems work in and around Seattle. But today she is here specifically to speak about the Food Equity Fund, but I have warned her that I might ask for her to share a little bit of her personal history after the discussion about the Food Equity Fund, so we can learn about her own personal pathway into farming and then into more of the programmatic and policy work. So we're going to have a short presentation. We'll have lots of time for questions, so please be thinking of questions and please bring them forward afterwards. And with that, Lorna, I just want to invite you up and thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'm very impressed of all of you who showed up on a very rainy day on Thanksgiving week, so I admire that in all of you. Lorna Velasco, I am a Food Equity Fund project manager. Simply, it means I administer grants in partnership with the community. So for this Food Equity Fund for today, I hope by the end of this presentation, you'll have a general sense of what is the Food Equity Fund and extend the ongoing conversation that you're having within this semester. So earlier in the semester, you talked about the sweetened beverage tax. I'm going to speak to it in a granular level, what it means to administer the grants. And then later on in the semester, you're going to be speaking with City of Seattle staff, Chris Iberly and also Bridget Igo, around the greater food plan by the city. And so we're going to learn about the diverse projects and program activities happening under the Food Equity Fund program. Here's just a quick overview. The Food Equity Fund is one of several programs funded by the City of Seattle's sweetened beverage tax. And then from what you remember, the sweetened beverage tax ordinance began in 2018. And it taxes distributors to pay 1.75 cents per ounce on sugar-sweetened beverage products distributed within the City of Seattle. It's designed to do a couple of things. One, it's to improve health of Seattle residents by reducing sales and consumption of sugary drinks. Two, it is a tax revenue, and we're using that to support healthy food access, child development, and also early learning programs. The ordinance also established the creation of the Sweetened Beverage Tax Community Advisory Board, consisting of a diverse range of subject matter experts and community leaders committed to advancing equity in health, healthy food access, and child well-being. They advise and make recommendations to the mayor and the city council on programs and services that will increase access to healthy food, improve child health development and learning. So in 2021, there were $20.3 million in revenue, where 61% went into food access and 39% went into child health and learning. The funds are supporting programs interdepartmentally within the City of Seattle. So it's funding programs in Human Services Department, the Department of Education and Early Learning, the Office of Sustainability and Environment, and my department, which is the Department of Neighborhoods. Some of these programs include Fresh Bucks, Prenatal to 3 grant programs, food banks, meal programs, health, food, and school programming, childcare nutrition, early childhood and health development support, and of course the Food Equity Fund. So specifically in 2022, we funded about $3.8 million, and we made this funding available specifically to community-identified and community-led projects that increase equitable access and opportunities to learn, to grow, and/or eat healthy, affordable, and culturally relevant foods. So there's 2 tiers in the program that we created. Like, it's a new program. It is our first year. It's our inaugural year. The first tier, we administered about $1 million in funds. The maximum allowable fund was $75,000, and for specifically projects around 3 to 12 months to do. There's a second tier, which is a higher funding amount. We administer about $2.8 million, between $80,000 to $150,000 for projects that's about up to 24 months. The groups that we're working with are nonprofit organizations, so organizations with a 501c3, but also community groups, ad hoc, informal groups, neighborhood groups who doesn't need to be a nonprofit or 501c3. They just need to partner with a fiscal sponsor who has a 501c3. So, neighborhoods can come together and create a project and apply for these funds. So we're going to go through the Tier 1 projects. That's the smaller grant program, smaller in terms of duration. These are organizations who receive between $10,000 to $75,000 for projects up to 12 months. And I will name all the organizations because I think it's important to really recognize the cultural leaders and the communities who are the leaders in this project and program activities. And they are specifically addressing challenges within the food systems directly. So this includes partnerships with local farmers to provide organically grown and culturally relevant produce that is free to the communities. This is done by the Black Dollar Days Task Force in their Clean Greens Farm and Market Program, City Fruits Harvest Program, the Rainier Beach Action Coalition's Farm Stand, and Book Lake City Together's Market at Lake City Square. So these are like farm stands, food distributors. There's also direct delivery of hot meals and weekly grocery distribution program led by the Central Area Senior Center's Let's Talk About Food program. The Eritrean Association Healthy Meals for Low-Income, Non-English Speaking Immigrant and Refugee Seniors Facing Food Insecurity. Candelia's Weekly Food Bags program for their students and their families. Talim's Community Center delivering community meals to BIPOC youth, Black, Indigenous people of color. The American Polynesian Organization's weekly hot meals and food distributions for seniors in Beacon Hill. And of course, the Freeway Park Association's Meals in Freeway Park, serving weekly meals for people experiencing homelessness. There's also education programs on the growing of food in urban areas by Queer the Land, Tilth Alliance, Percussion Farms and Preserves, the Black Farmers Collective, and culinary and training program by Hip Hop is Green and Casa Latina. There's also youth-centered food justice work. That's part of the what's already programming that I mentioned above, but also in the heart of the Youth and Leadership Development Program by Young Women Empowered at Mara Farm, and by the Food Empowerment Educational Sustainability Organization. I think Mara Farm you discussed earlier too in the semester. And so now for the next tier, this is specifically for programming that's up to 24 months. They were awarded between $75,000 to $150,000, and we had a funding amount of $2.8 million for these programs. So in this tier is also as varied as the tier 1. A few projects highlight intergenerational garden programs that bring young people and families together, like the Empowering Youth and Families Outreach, Children and Garden and Outdoor Classroom Program. The Rainier Valley Steering Committee, the program is called Seedlings to Consumption. It's a virtual program on food and gardening education. Food for All Youth Leadership Program, and Cultivate South Park's Urban Fresh Food Collective in South Park. I think you mentioned earlier too, Villa Comunitaria as an organization at Mara Farm, and their program is called Salsa de la Vida, and they're increasing food production for the South Park community. There's also the East African Service Project, FEED, to improve long-term food security of East African and immigrant communities, and then the Kamai Community of Seattle for Kamai Garden Plate Extension Program. A lot of these organizations are sourcing from Black, Indigenous, and people of color food producers as part of their market and food distribution programs, such as the African Community Housing and Development Program at the Delridge Farmers Market, the Family Works Culturally Responsive Appropriate Food Procurement for All, Wanawari's Love Offering Community Meal Program, providing free of cost African diasporic food and Native American-inspired soul food made by Black and Indigenous chefs, and then the Legacy of Equality, organizing programs building the beloved community through food equity by providing East African, Pacific Islander, Asian American, Latinx, and African American communities free organic vegetables and fruit boxes. There's also distribution programs in this tier and expanding access to culturally familiar fresh foods and vegetables. And this is led by White Center Food Bank, Lifelong AIDS Alliance, Beacon Food Forest, Bird Bar Place, Community Roots Housing, the Asian Counseling and Referral Service, and the Tongan Community Food Pantry. Food Sovereignty Programs is also participating in this grant program, and it's led by Indigenous community groups that includes the United Indian of All Tribes, the Way of Buffalo program that follows native techniques and ceremonies in butchering practices and community dispersals. You mentioned cultural lead and also Native educator, Valerie Seagrass. She's actually the recipient for her program called Friends of Feed. They're developing an online resource guide for Native producers. There's also the cafe, the All Cafe by Chief Seattle Club. It's over in, I think, Pioneer Square. They're creating a space for community to gather and connect with Native food and events. So I encourage, for those of you who are interested in finding out more about these organizations, for those of you interested in doing community work, I've only mentioned a very specific project that they're doing, but each organizations are working in a holistic way with their community, not only in food access, but also health, basic needs, development, economic development for the community. So I encourage you to seek out their websites, go to their programming and activities, and participate in any way that you can. So overall, the funding specifically have gone to support personnel, capacity building, the building of infrastructure such as greenhouses, commercial kitchens, raised beds, farm supplies, also the direct purchase of food and groceries for meals and distributions, continued education and training around the growing of and the preparation of foods. So what's happening with the Food Equity Fund for 2023? There's a lot. We're actually currently reviewing our application process, incorporating feedback from the community. Our supervisor, Lisa Chen, decided to take a pause and to really get community feedback so we can implement ways to improve our programming. So we're looking at ways to continue to support the community in the application process in general. We're doing this through community feedback, through online surveys. Lisa Chen is conducting listening sessions with the Tier 1 grantees to get their input, and also city staff that works in various departments. I also encourage, for those of you who are working in communities, who are interested in working in communities, there are specific grant programs beyond the Food Equity Fund. I put the online site, the Neighborhoods and Community Grants Program. There's the Neighborhood Matching Fund, the Duwamish River Opportunities Fund, and also Food Equity Fund. So there are a lot of opportunities around other investments in the communities. I also want to introduce you to our team. This is the Food Equity Fund team. Sometimes when you talk about the city of Seattle, it's such a huge institution, and you look at us as institutions, but wanted to just let you know that in the food equity team, we come from a diverse background. We're very much centered around community work. We're rooted in community work. A few of us are former executive directors of nonprofit organizations. Some of us are arts and culture workers. Some of us are farmers or gardeners. And some of us are cultural and community leaders. So just wanted to encourage you in terms of like with these kinds of investment and funding, you're always welcome to just call any of the project managers to ask more about the programming if you are interested in finding out more. Let's see. I think that's it. Anyone have any questions? That's it for in terms of the Food Equity Fund.
First, I think it's a round of applause. So, as you all are thinking of your questions and getting ready to share your thoughts and share your responses, I want to first just share a reflection that I had listening to your presentation, Lorna, and I'm just going to speak over this way if that's okay. But just to say, what an amazing group of organizations that we have across the city. So I think sometimes, you've also humanized the work of food systems in many ways, right? I love that you showed the people who are staffing the Food Equity Fund, but also there's people all over the city and the region who are working in community to advance food systems for their own communities and for the region at large. So I was really struck by the number of organizations I've never heard of and that I'm so impressed with to see emerging and to see that they've been successful at getting funding. So even just the breadth of who has applied for the program and been successful, I think is just a real opportunity to learn about the incredible work that's happening in our area. So that to me was just my reflection that I wanted to share while students are gathering their thoughts. Does anybody have a question that's ready? Please, Mara, yes. And then, Lorna, I'll just ask you to repeat the question.
Sure, absolutely.
I'll just ask the question up here. So I was curious about, for the grants, are the grants specifically for projects that are sort of like implementation ready, like they've already sort of like figured out exactly what they're going to do and they just need the funding then to run? Or are there also grants that can be given for organizations that sort of have an idea, but they need funding to really develop the idea, if that makes sense?
Sure. No, that's a great question. And I'm going to answer it in two ways. One, at the granular level, like what's been happening, and also I want to speak to like the principle of the whole budget that we're adhering to. And so the first question is around, if it's for organizations who has an idea and wants to do the work, or is it more for like the ready programming? And it's a balance of both. We want to honor the work that's already been done by the community, but really have not had the opportunity to be funded. Because we understand that the community themselves are very, very clear and specific on the needs of the community, and with or without funding, they're already doing this work. And so the fact that there's funding opportunity allows them to really grow their capacity. They can pay the people to administer their programming. They can actually pay for culturally relevant foods, can sometimes be more expensive than like off-the-shelf stuff. But also we want to encourage ideas and new programs for emerging needs from the community. For example, the Tongan Community Food Pantry. It's a fairly new idea, but these are the same community who's created funds and support system that happened because of like the volcano eruption in Tonga. And so they have a strong community already. And so they're wanting to fulfill the need to fulfill the need in terms of answering to the food insecurity that their communities are facing. So that's one in terms of the emerging projects and emerging ideas. Part of the principles that we're adhering to is actually brought to us by the the CAB, the Community Advisory Council that was created in order to make sure they monitor how we're administering the funds. So some of the budget principles is around we need to be focusing on the priority population, and how they define priority populations are reaching the communities of color, immigrants, refugees, people with low incomes, and English language learners, as well as youth in the community as priority population. We need to focus on place-based focus areas, so where communities of color, immigrant, refugees, people with low incomes, English language learners, where they live. So a lot of these programs are very neighborhood-based, programs that are community-driven, led and guided and implemented by community-based organization that has a real authentic relationships with community. And also projects that are culturally responsive, so that we're delivering or they're delivering in ways that is comfortable and accessible for the communities that they're working with.
Thank you. Are organizations able to reapply for grants?
That's a good question. So she asked, I'm sorry, what was your name?
Stephanie.
Stephanie asked if organizations can reapply. Yes. Quick answer to your question, we encourage organizations to apply. We understand that some of these projects needs to be sustained over time. It can't just be like a one-time fund or one-time project. But we do want to make sure that they finish their project first, that they need to complete all the outcomes and deliverables, and then they're able to reapply. We're trying to understand, as part of our, pause and feedback, it's trying to understand the timing of things. Part of the questions that we're asking is that what's the best timing when we administer the funds? Is it before the growing season, during the growing season? So those are some of the factors that we're considering, when funds should be available. Yeah.
So my suggestion is that we actually just turn to your neighbors and you just have a 2-minute chat about what we've just heard about, so that you have an opportunity to share something that is new to you, and then maybe as a group of 2 or 3, generate another question about this opportunity. It's really something that is still emerging and might become an example for other cities and for other regions. And so we might just really think through at this new stage, we're really at the crux of seeing what could be, right? How we could fund community-based food systems. So just to give yourselves a little bit of time to chat with each other and to think through what we've just heard about and what we might still ask. So if you're not sitting close to someone, you might need to turn around or do a little dance to get close to someone so that you can just have a 3-minute check-in with each other.
And if any brave souls want to share ideas, I will capture those ideas and bring it back to my team.
Ooh, that's great. Okay, so please talk amongst yourselves for a couple minutes and then we'll regroup here. I hope that's okay. I feel like sometimes a little break where they can talk to each other can be really helpful.
I was looking around, it seems like people are listening.
Oh yeah, no, they're super eager. I feel the same way. I feel like I just need a minute before I respond sometimes. So I just try to appeal to their different learning styles, You're a mom, Right? Like there's one of them does it this way, one of them does it the other way.
You're a much better student than I was a student.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, right. I'm sure you were juggling a couple things, Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense, yeah. Okay, great. And this is, it's always also nice just to give students a chance. In seminar, we don't often have time to have them talk to each other. So I just wanted to take advantage of the couple minutes that we have and then see what else comes through. Yeah, okay, great. So I'll just give them 1 more minute and then we'll bring it back in. And I've
It's at 12:05 right now?
It's 12:05, that's right. You just came. Oh, great. I'm so glad you're here. Oh, cool. Yeah, hey,
Well,
Or you're not?
I'm on campus, but my teacher,
Cancel.
she counts.
Yeah, right.
She's, well, I'm assuming she's.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to go to the website.
It's going to the state visitor. Yeah. This is just a guest in our class today. He saw the title and was like, I'm interested. I'm going to check it out. So glad you're here. Wow. Yeah, so I don't know if there's anything like this in Georgia. Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I never heard of anything like this. So when I seen it, I was like, my fact, my granddad, we mainly do like, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, either way. How do you pronounce it?
I said,
Okay, that works.
but yeah, that's like, when I was little, like I used to work on this. Where, I think the last time I came out was when I was like 18. Like, I went to the clinic. What was crazy for me, like, when I was born in different states and countries, like, I would see, like, the food. Like, the food was, like, so different. I try to get people here to eat, like, then from the South, steak, but it's, like, not that. A lot of grease.
Yeah, right. But like, there's some really great ingredients too, and some, opportunities to celebrate.
Wait, where is it?
It's in Central District. It's called Wildlife Farm. So
I just want to say that one of my favorite things in seminars, when we give you all a chance to chat with each other, we get to hear the buzz of discussion. So thank you all for participating. I don't mean to cut you off, and I hope you had a chance to share some ideas, some questions. And Lorna, if you're willing, I'll invite you back up here to just see if there's more discussion to be had as we round out the class. Any questions that came up? Is that a hand? Careful, in this class, if you put your hair behind your ear, I'm going to call on you. I'm going to think, oh, you raised your hand. Yes.
I'm kind of just curious if you do any advertising, or if you try and localize on certain neighborhoods, or kind of how you get this opportunity out.
no, that's a really great question. So he's asking, how do we get these opportunities out? What kind of advertisements do we do? We're very intentional in how we work with communities, and so within the city of Seattle, there is a department program called Community Liaisons. They're our partners, and so what they do is they work with the roster of about over 80 people, and they're actually community leaders from their various neighborhoods throughout the city of Seattle. And so we work in partnership with them in order to do the pre-outreach before the application is due. So what they do is they go meet with people directly. They go to community centers, hands out the flyers or the posters and the programs. They bring people to our workshops and to our office hours. They help answer a few of the questions that people may have. And we do that using multilingual community liaisons. So I was working with an amazing community liaison. Her name is Mariela Barriga. She actually works for Highline Highline School District as a food promoter. She's also a Spanish speaker. She's also a trusted young leader within her community. So automatically people, trust her and trust the information that they're being given. And we also have an Oromo cultural leader. We also have an Amharic speaker. We have specifically a liaison that works with like the Black community, who is like a trusted leader from that community as well. And they're the ones who do the advertising directly to the various neighborhoods and communities that we work with. So that's one. And then the flyers that we have, we make sure we translate it into the different languages. Unfortunately, the application is not translated in any language, it's still English. But we're hoping that with the community leaders, with the we translate the workshops in the various languages as well. So even if the application is in English, at least they understand the information that they're having to answer to. But that's a great question. So that's one way of we're trying to kind of engage and intentionally bring the community in a thoughtful way. Sure, that's a great question. So she's asking, what is the expected follow-up with the communities who are the recipient of these funding? So the follow-up is actually what they define. And so they themselves, each organization define what their measurable outcomes are. So they tell us that with this funding, we're going to do A, B, and C. And so whatever that is what we use as their outcome. So each agency, they have the agency to create their own deliverables that make sense for the projects that they're doing and that makes sense for their community. So for example, part of the application is that what's your work, we ask them what's your work plan? Who's gonna finish, who's gonna lead your work plan? And then what's the schedule of your work plan? Like the who, what, where, and how of your programming. So with the Tongan Community Pantry Group, for example, part of their work plan is that for 11 months, we're gonna distribute culturally relevant groceries to up to 75 families. And we're gonna do it at a parking lot at a church, because that's where we all meet. It's really critical and important for them to have the church as a setting for them to distribute food. And that the church themselves is helping them with the space. And this is the place where they naturally congregate. And so that's their deliverable. For 11 months, they're gonna distribute up to 75 families. And so as a program manager, I just check in with them monthly and ask, how's everything, what's happening. The monthly check-ins that we have with our community members is an opportunity to anticipate any problems or issues that they may have. Some of the conversations I'm already having is, for example, with Wanawari, which is a Black Arts Center who's offering weekly meals and foods for up to 75 families weekly. They're seeing like 100 families instead. So we're anticipating, like for this organization who just started, there's already a great need to support more people within that organization. So we're anticipating that, and so we're in conversations around like what other funding opportunities can we look at so that you can sustain your program for the duration, which is like a 1-year program that they have. Good questions.
A little bit of a follow-up to that. I'm wondering what other forms of support that you offer the organizations.
Besides funding. I can speak to the technical support in applying for the grant, because that's what we did in 2022. There's some ideas for 2023, how we can extend support, but there's no details yet. For 2022, some of the technical support that we do is that we want to make sure that we have office hours, so like a weekly office hours that we provided. So for people who are emerging, who have an idea, but are still understanding like what this idea is all about, it's an opportunity for them to go into like an office hours with us for like 2 or 3 hours, and we hear their ideas and we ask questions around, okay, so you're doing a program and it's for 6 months. Who's leading this program? Because one thing that we want to be careful of is sometimes with these community projects, sometimes it's taken on by one person, And we want to make sure that that one person can create a community around them in order to make the program sustainable and feasible. So we ask that kind of question. We ask about, you know, a location where they're considering if they have property permission so that they have the support of the property. And we ask for like a letter of support from that property to make sure that that property owner is going to adhere to the program for that set amount of time, that there's like some kind of partnership agreement before they commit to the program. So those are some of the technical elements in helping support communities to apply. In terms of future opportunities and ways, some of the asks is that, you know, the grantees themselves want opportunities to talk to each other and to share resources with one another, because sometimes what they find is that there's best practices that can be shared amongst the organizations that's been tried and true, and they want to convene with each other and have opportunities to exchange ideas and also exchange resources.
Exactly know how to word this question, but I was curious if there's like any preference given to applications for programs that are like based more on like, it sounds like some are maybe doing more focused on like food distribution within communities versus like food production, or like kind of going at some underlying like systemic things rather than like something that might be more like a short-term food distribution program that might be harder to sustain down the road, like after funding is over for like a 12-month period?
Sure. The question she asked was if there's a particular preference that we lean to, you know, whether we're mostly focused on the distribution versus systems work. And I forgot to mention, one of the biggest thing too is like we don't make the decisions as project managers. Actually, we give the community review panel the decisions to make the recommendations to the mayor and to the city. So in terms of preferences, where people lean to, it all depends on the makeup of the community review panel. And what we encourage them to do is to have a balance of both, you know, direct services that has to do with like feeding people, and then food system work that has to do with the growing of food, the health of the soil, the greater systems work around the development of capacity for like environmental and also food leaders, food justice work, training and opportunities. So we encourage them to create like a balance of like funding so that we can make sure that we're holistically approaching the work. And so for the community review panel, we try to bring in people who are incredibly, also diverse as the grantees who are applying, who are, you know, they understand not only what it takes to work with communities, but they understand what it takes around the food production work. We had a farmer, we had a cultural leader, like a known cultural leader for the community who's working with central district communities, working with international district communities. So we want to make sure that we have like a robust kind of like panel. We have youth participate also in the community review panel, so we encourage a lot of like intergenerational panels as well. But so every panel will decide differently, and so we anticipate like every year there'll be a different kind of focus depending on the panels.
Would your team be open to, let's say, like funding a student thesis, like to carry out, like for example, like a program evaluation or something along those lines?
Okay, good question. He's asking if we would be interested in funding a student thesis that has to do with like a food systems work. If this thesis has to do around or centered around projects that's rooted in community work. And so if you are interested, I encourage you to work directly with the community groups that was listed in the Tier 1 and Tier 2. Because there are opportunities to understand the kind of programming and ways to develop parts of their projects that will go towards improving food systems work. But in terms of like one student, it's a harder ask. But if you're part of a community, if you're coming from the community, and this is what the community ask is, then there's more opportunities to fund these kinds of programs. Does that make sense? Is that okay? Yeah.
So I hope we're going to see more of your reflections and more questions through your submissions, if you're still submitting weekly reflections. Lorna, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful presentation. Please keep an eye on the Food Equity Fund and see where they go next, right? This is a great opportunity for our city and to set an example for other cities as well. Have a wonderful week. Hope you have wonderful meals and time with your friends and family this week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.